Okay, so first, as Antonio said, I'd like to convey apologies from Philip, who would have liked to have been here, but has a passport issue, so is in Scotland at the moment. So this talk actually follows on very well from the previous talk, and I guess it's a lot narrower in scope, but I think the issues are very similar. So what I actually want to do today is basically to introduce Moses, which, as you probably know, is an open source software system for machine translation, and to explain how this open source approach we believe meets the requirements of diversity for machine translation. And this is both diversity in terms of the stakeholders and diversity in terms of the languages. So, what is Moses? It's a statistical machine translation system which includes both training and decoding. So, for training, we have some parallel text in the source language and the target language. And Moses gives us the machine learning algorithms to estimate the parameters of the models, which we can then use for machine translation. And Moses comes with a decoder, which takes text in the source language and translates it into the required target language. So Moses it's an open source system, and it has global input. And if you look at the web page, you can see the number of developers. But it does have a strong European orientation, and in particular it's been supported by a number of EU projects from FP6 and FP7, Euromatrix, Euromatrix Plus, and Let's MT. It's also a flexible system, and it's flexible in a number of ways. It's flexible in terms of licensing, which makes it amenable for use in the commercial sector by both service providers and content developers. Localization developers. And it's also flexible in terms of the models and algorithms it supports. So, for example, it supports both phrase-based statistical machine translation and hierarchical or syntax-based statistical machine translation. And as I said, it's an open source system, so Philipp's team at the University of Edinburgh have been key in developing it, but there have been significant contributions from a lot of different places, and he just named two key collaborators here, FBK and Charles University. Since it started, it's become a widely used system. If you go, the website gets several thousand visits per month, and there's a very active mailing list. And I think what's of particular interest is that Moses gets both strong academic use and commercial use from people who do not do machine translation research. As an academic system, it plays, I think, an important role in a number of ways. In particular, it provides a baseline approach. So it means that if you're publishing research in machine translation, you can compare it against a strong baseline and what is, in fact, a state-of-the-art baseline. And I think this is clearly demonstrated by the kind of high citation count that the Moses papers have had. It also drastically lowers the barrier of entry for new research groups in machine translation. So, for example, if you want to do state-of-the-art research in machine translation, you do not need to build your own decoder because you can use the Moses decoder. And this is clearly evident in the various evaluation campaigns, where about half of the submissions are using, to some degree or other, the Moses framework. This is actually, I think, important and a factor we see across a number of open source software systems in language technologies, such as Festival and HTS for speech synthesis, HTK for speech recognition, that it really lowers the entry barrier for new groups, so you can focus on specific aspects of your research, but still have a state-of-the-art system. But I think importantly, Moses also is getting a growing number of commercial users. So these are users which is, you could think of these as resellers, where people are building customized systems for specific domains or scenarios. And also service companies who are using Moses in-house. So if you want to find out more about Moses, then you can look at the website at statmt.org, and you can download the binaries and source code from the Subversion repository. And there's a lot of documentation there, both in terms of documentation for the Moses software itself, tutorials on how to use it, and some background on statistical MT methods. There's also a link to an online demo there at demo.statmt.org, where there's a number of models for different language pairs which you can experiment with, and you can also provide corrections to help improve translation. Probably best not to try it right now, as performance may be slow in here. Okay, so what I want to talk about now is something I think that fits in very well with what Joseph was just saying. So research and machine translation and its development and its use is diverse. So it's diverse across the various stakeholders. It's diverse across the use cases and scenarios, and it's diverse across languages. And increasingly at the research level, machine translation research is becoming more and more language specific. And this is seen in the rise of things like syntactic-based or hierarchical machine translation. And it's more and more the case that for example, the ideal researcher to look at machine translation into Estonia is probably a native of Estonia. So one of the things that open source frameworks and general open resource frameworks give us is that it helps to develop a broad network of academic and commercial institutions working around the same problem. And I think this is very closely aligned with the aims of Meta and MetaNet. And I think the large industrial players, in particular Google, have really changed the game in kind of highlighting machine translation and making it, in a sense, a commodity use. But machine translation is also probably just broader than what is supplied by the few big labs. And I think that there's also a risk in not developing such broad networks. And the recent change in status of the Google Translate API, I think is a good example of that. So we see Moses very much as part of such a broad network. So who are the different stakeholders that we see for Moses, or alternatively, what's the diversity? So we have academic researchers. We have commercial developers who are looking at things like localization, looking at providing translation services, perhaps in specific domains, and also the assistance for human translation service providers. Importantly, there's also a lot of different language pairs to consider. For sure, there are now good translation systems, or from a machine translation researcher's point of view, good translation systems for languages that have rich resources, English, French, Spanish, and so on. In terms of machine translation, many of the official languages of the EU, in terms of the technology, can be referred to as second-tier languages. There don't exist the resources for these languages. And then we go and look at all the regional languages just in the EU, never mind globally, which are greatly under-resourced in terms of machine translation technology. And for all of these things, the open source and open resources approach provides a network to connect these stakeholders. So perhaps when Moses is first developed, it was started to think of, well, this is just some open source software, and it will help other researchers, and the open source infrastructure connects the researchers. But increasingly, it can be used to connect researchers to commercial developers, and it can connect commercial developers and researchers to users. And I think it would be too complex, but the arrows on this diagram aren't simply one directional because the experience of users and the domains users work in and so on can have an impact on the development of the software. So much of the core Moses development is of course centered in the research community. And Moses is an open source project, so researchers don't just use Moses, they contribute back to it and can become active contributors to Moses. And there's a number of research projects in the EU and elsewhere which are directly extending the system. And again, you can see this in the pages on the Moses website. A good example of involving the research community are the MT marathons, which I think were founded by the Euromatrix project, and the sixth of these is happening later this year in Trento. And these are really interesting events which kind of combine a summer school with sort of a coding boot camp and an open source convention. So there's a lot of hands-on experience, and code can get developed, and students can attend lectures and labs and so on with top researchers. More recently, there's been a lot of work to involve the user community with Moses, and in particular, this has come through the Translation Automation User Society, who have organised a lot of outreach events to assess user needs, and have also developed a number of tutorials. And there's a growing number of projects which are sort of part of the ecology that's grown up around Moses to address these user needs. So just to name a few, there's Let's MT, which is primarily looking at building customizable or tailored machine translation systems. There's a Google Code project called Moses for Mere Mortals, which basically bridges the gap for a technology researcher between the Moses open source distribution and all the scripts that are required to actually build a strong baseline system, but on very large amounts of data. There's the very interesting Do Moses Yourself project, which is aimed not really at technologists, but at translators, and again is aimed at bridging a sort of bigger gap between the translator who, without such a project, it might take 3 or 4 months of work to go from actually clicking download on Moses to actually having the first sort of test system. And the idea of Do Moses Yourself is to enable non-technical or certainly non-R&D users of Moses to be able to deploy Moses. And there's Moses Core, which is a new FP7 support action currently being negotiated, which is really all about community building for Moses, both at the research level and at the user level. And this is in collaboration with Taos. So what are the future directions for Moses? Well, in terms of research, there's obviously lots of things that are required to make machine translation better. For example, statistical models that incorporate syntax and semantics, and then this feeds back to the language communities who are working machine translation, because these start to become quite language dependent. Integration with speech technologies. So Moses has a sort of limited integration already in terms of being able to decode from lattices or confusion networks, but it's of interest to see if that integration can be usefully made tighter. And I think across all language technologies, there's the big issue of adaptation to domains, to tasks, personalization, and so on. And a second big area is the integration of Moses in computer-aided translation tools. So, for example, the integration of translation memory and statistical MT. And this latter area is the focus of a couple of new FP7 streps also under negotiation. So, I'd like to finish it there. at the end of this session, you can ask questions, but it may well be a lot of your questions can be best answered from the Moses website or by Philipp himself. So thank you very much.